Good evening, good afternoon to the listening audience. Just wanted to call this meeting of the Public Safety, Transportation, and Environment Subcommittee to order. I just want to acknowledge my colleagues, as we do with each and every meeting. We'll always start with the veteran of the committee, George Edwards, who will be here momentarily, Senator Jackson, and Senator Johnny Ray Sailing. Today we will hear from 4 respective agencies in reference to the budget: the Office of Public Defender, State Lottery Gaming and Control Agency, MDOT, the Secretary's Office, Department of Juvenile Services. At this moment, we're going to get started with the Office of Public Defender, and we'll start with Caleb Weiss. Mr. Weiss, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to go ahead here, and the document is up on the screen. And starting here, we have for the fiscal 2023 allowance, the budget increases by $5.7 million of 4.9% to bring the total to $120.5 million. Moving ahead to an overview of the agency's spending in fiscal 2023, as you can see here, 78% of spending goes towards personnel expenses. This is similar to prior years. And then you have at 15% you have case-related expenses, with the particulars of it broken out in this bar over here. For the proposed budget change in Exhibit 2, I'd like to draw your attention to the step increases for attorneys to maintain competitive salaries at $2.2 million. This is a $2.2 million increase. And then down below in other charges, here is $1.7 million in funds to restart the workload reduction attorney program. Moving ahead towards the personnel data, as you can see here, there are no changes in regular positions in fiscal 2023. However, there is a decrease of 16.25 contractual positions. The public defenders' contractual positions fluctuate in response to workload demands, and the fiscal 2023 allowance reflects the reduction of these FTEs based on reduced caseloads. But the funding does increase by $0.5 million over the fiscal 2022 working appropriation. Moving on to vacancies. The vacancies are particularly high for experienced attorneys within the Public Defender's Office, and we're asking that OPD should comment on vacancies and the impact that it's having on its operations and its ability to represent indigent Marylanders and have them access their right to legal representation. Here in Exhibit 3, we have a breakdown of the current vacancies by position classification. As you can see, actually the largest number of vacancies currently is the Assistant Public Defender 3, which are more experienced public defenders, with 26 vacancies. And then the next largest is also a more experienced classification at 19 vacancies for Public Defender 2. For the entry-level Public Defender 1s, there are 14 vacancies. And scrolling. Okay. On to the Managing for Results section. I will note here at the beginning that there was data that was lost in the ransomware attack. So the fiscal 2020 data was not able to be captured in the following exhibits. This was due to the security breach, but also because OPD switched from reporting on a calendar year basis in calendar 2019 to reporting on a fiscal year basis in 2021. Here we have in Exhibit 4, we have the district and circuit court caseloads. There's a 37.8% decrease and a 47% decrease, respectively, in district court and circuit court caseloads between calendar 2019 and fiscal 2021. And we're asking that OPD should comment on the impact of COVID-19 on its operations, and if it believes the cases will return to pre-COVID-19 levels, and if there's any backlog currently in cases. Moving ahead to district offices meeting the standards. Again, here you have the 2019 calendar year and the 2021 fiscal year in the blue. As you can see, there was a dramatic increase in fiscal 2021 in the number of the district offices meeting their caseload standards per attorney. And we're asking that OPD should comment on the increase in the percent meeting their caseload standards, and if it believes that this trend will continue once the courts resume normal operations post-COVID-19. Exhibit 6, we have the panel attorneys used and cases paneled. As you can see here in fiscal 2021 versus calendar 2019, both the panel attorneys used and the cases paneled both decreased. Moving ahead into the second issue, which deals with OPD attorney turnover and compensation. The turnover rate increased rapidly in 2021. It saw an uptick from 9% the prior year to 15% in calendar 2021. And we're asking that OPD should comment on this increase in turnover rates for attorneys and address any steps that are currently being taken to decrease this rate. Exhibit 7, just depicts this increase in the turnover rate. As you can see here, from 2020 to 2021, there's a significant increase. This shows the turnover number of departures by classification of attorneys. As you can see, there's an increase, a dramatic increase in the number of attorneys with the classification of Assistant Public Defender number 3 and Assistant Public Defender number 2. This kind of mirrors what you saw with the vacancies in the earlier chart, where the highest number of vacancies were in those two classifications. Next, we're going to get into the compensation section, which includes a comparison of salaries at various levels of public defender classifications versus relevant jurisdictions, namely in this case Virginia, Arlington, and within Virginia, Arlington and Fairfax counties. As you can see here, while Maryland public defenders receive relatively similar compensation to Virginia public defenders with no supplements, the comparison between Arlington County and Fairfax County, the two northernmost counties in Virginia, Maryland public defenders do lag those two jurisdictions pretty significantly, starting at the entry level and continuing all the way up to the head of the public defender's office and the deputy as well. Next, we'll compare it to, here is a comparison between OPD's salaries in the yellow here, and the DC Public Defender Service and the Office of the Federal Public Defenders for the District of Maryland in the red. As you can see here, at all levels, Maryland Public Defender pay at OPD lags behind both DC Public Defenders and Federal Public Defenders for the District of Maryland. And due to that, we're asking that OPD should comment on the lower compensation that OPD attorneys receive compared to peer agencies and the impact that this is having on turnover rates. The second issue is the OLA fiscal compliance audit in August of which was released in August of 2021. I'm not going to read all of the findings here. I would like to highlight the one that OPD did not fully implement 3 of the 10 recommendations issued by the Department of Information Technology based on its investigation of the IT security incident that happened in March of 2020. Here is a short description of that IT incident, which was a ransomware attack in March of 2020, and DLS is recommending the adoption of committee narrative, requesting a report on IT security conditions within OPD, and the steps that are being taken by OPD to implement the recommendations referenced above by Do It. And with that, we have the recommended actions. Here we have DLS is recommending a committee narrative requesting a report on attorney applicant hiring and separations. This would include information on the number of applicants for attorney positions, the classifications of newly hired attorneys, the number of separations by those classifications, and the reason for the separations. The second is the IT security conditions report that I just talked about. And there is one update that I'd like to, there's actually 2 updates, but one particular update I'd like to draw your attention to, which is the workload reduction pilot program funding. It was rescinded in fiscal 2021, and it has been restored in the current budget. So there's some information there regarding that program as well. And with that, that ends my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Weiss. Seeing no questions from my colleagues at this time, we'll hear from the State Public Defender, Paul DeWolf, and his team.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning. I first want to begin by thanking Caleb for his analysis. I think he has worked closely with our staff and understands our agency quite a bit. I'd like to introduce Deputy Public Defender Keith Lottridge. Keith will be giving the agency's response, and I also want to introduce Kathy Mattis, who is our Chief Financial Officer, and she and I will be available for questions. This is my 12th meeting with this committee, and it will be my last. I will be retiring at the end of my second 6-year term, which is in June. So I want to thank Caleb and I want to thank the committee for all of your help and understanding over the years. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Lottridge, who will be giving the agency response. And as I said, Ms. Mattis and I will be available to answer any questions that the committee may have. But thank you once again.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. I am Keith Lottridge, and as Mr. DeWolf said, I'm the Deputy Public Defender for the state of Maryland. I also wish to thank Caleb for his detailed analysis of our budget. We appreciate his ongoing support and guidance as we navigate the fiscal challenges of serving our clients, especially in light of COVID and its impact on our agency. I will give a brief overview of our current situation, our ongoing efforts, and our needs moving forward, and hopefully address all of the questions raised. As you are aware, our agency has always been challenged with an exceptionally high volume of cases, which has resulted in attorneys consistently maintaining a workload beyond what is reasonable or appropriate. The backlog of cases as a result of court closures during COVID exacerbates this issue, possibly to unsustainable levels. Our core staff and attorneys must consistently monitor the backlog of cases to ensure our clients are regularly informed about their cases and to help them with the consequences and uncertainty stemming from long delays and detention. While court closures and delays significantly curtail the number of matters that could be resolved, the inflow of new cases and matters has not stopped. Consequently, caseloads grow daily in our offices and courts. Even with the delays, we have to work on our clients' behalf in all aspects of the cases at all times. This goes beyond just being prepared and present at trial and hearings. For example, it means we have a duty to contest and address the consequences of pretrial delay. The court closures resulted in many of our clients remaining incarcerated for longer and longer periods of time. For some misdemeanor cases, the delay is as long as the maximum sentence available. The delay in trial dates has also delayed the availability of treatment and services and increased the instability of our clients' families. In response, we are constantly working to obtain release for clients and continue to advocate for improved conditions and safety measures. These efforts may not resolve cases, but they are a critical part of our professional obligation to mitigate some of the ongoing consequences of the delays and ensure our clients' well-being. To complicate matters related to tracking our caseload, many defendants, especially those who are not incarcerated, wait to secure legal representation until they have a court date. This means there's a much larger pool of potential clients in the judiciary's backlog that we are unable to track. We will not know how many additional cases by location or area of law until they are set for trial or hearings and the individuals involved qualify for our services. And things are about to change yet again. Next month, the courts are scheduled to end Phase 3 on March 7th of their COVID plan and increase the number of criminal matters scheduled, including the resumption of jury trials. If, as we expect, the court increases the number of cases heard per day to address the backlog of cases and the current inflow of cases, OPD will be representing more clients on a daily basis than we were pre-COVID, without any additional resources. In addition, OPD is not immune to the turnover of personnel as a result of COVID. The Great Resignation we're experiencing, our turnover during COVID, as Caleb mentioned, was 15% in 2021, if it remains on track for 2022, we will be at 16%. At the moment, we have 65 open attorney positions. That's more than 10% of our attorney force. Beyond the challenges created by COVID, caseloads for OPD attorneys have exceeded standard caseloads for years as measured by standards derived in a work study from 2005. I'm here to tell you that that work study from 2005 is dramatically outdated. For example, in 2005, in the work study from 2005, a simple DUI would have required reviewing 10 pages of discovery, meeting with your client, reviewing that 10 pages of discovery again with your client, trying to contact the charging officer, and maybe negotiating with the state attorney. In 2022, we would be doing all of those activities, but now we are also trying to collect and review all of the cruiser cam and body-worn camera from every officer present. We have to review it and then review it with our client. In the 2005 work study, that would have been about 2 hours of work, what we had to do in 2005. In 2022, it's at a minimum 6 hours of work. That's a threefold increase for one traffic case by one of our attorneys. This summer, the American Bar Association, the National Center for State Courts, and the RAND Corporation, and other leading entities that conduct public defender workload assessments are establishing national caseload standards for public defenders. We anticipate that these revised standards will show that OPD attorney caseloads are shockingly higher than indicated against the 2005 caseload standards. Even under pre-COVID circumstances, those standards in this caseload is unsustainable. And quite frankly, they create a risk of ineffective assistance of counsel for cases across the state. We struggle to address these issues with current funding. We need more attorneys. In addition to our backload and workload issues, OPD's salary structure is not competitive to recruit and retain the staff necessary to provide quality representation to our clients. The trial experience our attorneys acquire during their time at OPD makes them highly desirable for other public and private legal firms, where they can earn more money and maintain a smaller workload. OPD is unable to offer competitive salaries or career paths that attract, retain, and incentivize our attorneys, especially for those attorneys who are handling complex cases, and most especially as caseloads rise and vacancies increase. We have advocated for OPD salary increases for all our staff for years. OPD attorney salaries had not been adjusted since 2004. While OPD was able to get approval for some salary increases for certain attorneys in fiscal year 2022, these increases were only for attorneys, not core staff, and for those only with the greatest pay disparities. Our attorneys do not work in a vacuum, but rely on the professionalism and expertise of our core staff and social workers. When staffing cuts are mandated, as they have been several times over the last 15 years, OPD has had to sacrifice core staff positions. As a result, attorneys are required to perform administrative tasks that are more effectively and efficiently performed by core staff, and further affect the attorney's ability to handle the caseloads. OPD has requested approval for a new position and salary structure for OPD core staff that more accurately reflects the critical experience and impact of these positions in the agency and supports quality, recruitment, and retention of these positions. To address more opportunity for attorney advancement, OPD has requested approval for a new position and salary structure to recruit, promote, and retain our attorneys, especially those handling the most complicated of cases. In short, OPD needs human resources to ensure that it can meet its constitutional obligations to its clients and overcome all of the challenges that have been exacerbated by COVID. We need more staff. We need more attorneys. We need higher salaries. We also need a system where our people can advance and we can retain and recruit and retain. The people who work at the Office of the Public Defender are dedicated to our mission and our clients in all conditions. We ask for additional resources and funding to ensure that we meet our obligations to support them. Thank you.
Thank you. Couple quick questions. It sounds like the workers are saying the same thing that you all are saying in reference to the low pay and the staff shortages. Can you all just talk about your strategies that you have taken? Obviously, you talked about the 2005 report, but some strategies that you're taking specifically this year where there is a surplus.
Well, with respect to the caseload, as Keith has said, that there are coming on board national standards for caseloads that we hope to be part of. We've reached out to the national folks that are running the caseload studies. There is a bill before Congress to assist public defense nationwide in developing national standards and in meeting those standards, and we're hopeful that there will be some additional funds available from the federal government with respect to assisting public defense across the country. So that's part of the strategy. We'll be part of those national those national standards, and we're working with the people that are developing them, and we have been all along. So that we hope that that'll happen by the summer. And obviously, we're working with the Department of Budget Management. Keith mentioned the additional salaries. While they're not competitive with the PDS and the federal public defender, I would have to say that that most, even the Virginia organizations that Caleb mentioned, it's a fact that the federal salaries are on a higher scale than almost any state salary that we're aware of. So we're working, obviously, to increase the salaries of our attorneys to make them more competitive, and that will help both retention and recruitment. So I hope that answers your question. Is there anything you want to say?
Somewhat. I just wanted to make sure that I thought I was reading it, but I just want to be clear. While I acknowledge, and it was acknowledged in reference to the federal salaries, but it doesn't look like we're keeping up with the comparison states either.
We are not.
Okay, just wanted to be clear.
We are behind in Virginia.
I got it.
Behind in the District of Columbia. I
Yep.
can go
Yep.
yes. Essentially, if you can help us with that, here's a pen.
Got it. The other piece is in reference to the 3 out of 10 recommendations, like, how are we moving, progressing through that? I'm assuming that we are. Obviously, the audit was done, but it is commented on in the analysis. Where are we at out of the 3 out of 10 recommendations?
For the IT,
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm going to turn to Kathy
The
Menace.
first two were with respect to a risk assessment policy, and the other was a risk management policy that were both drafted and implemented before the final report came out.
Okay.
The third one, we are addressing in a little bit more of a piecemeal but acceptable way, because it had to do with access to applications on our mobile laptop network, and there's a lot of jurisdictional variation in what those applications are, and so the IT group employs Sentinel-1, which allows, I don't know anything about it, by the way, but a more localized recognition of what applications can be used by what user group.
Thank you, and that's helpful. Last question, if you can answer it very quickly. I'm assuming that the travel picks up 700% because caseloads are about to start with COVID and in previous years, but just wanted to confirm that.
Yeah, I think our travel will pick up, but I will say that because we have adopted attorney mobility, every attorney has a laptop, every attorney has mobile devices, that much of the travel, and we've worked with the prisons and the jails in order to arrange for video conferencing and video visits. The travel will not go back to pre-2019 dates, but it will certainly pick up again as the courts open up and as jury trials begin again, and the backlog comes on board, which we think should happen post-COVID.
Got it. I said last question, but this is the last question. They had a program, $2 million was put in to bring about contract attorneys online, caseloads were taken care of. Can you talk about some of the disadvantages? I see all the advantages, but I'm not clear on the disadvantages. And if you could talk about them briefly.
So there are a few disadvantages. First of all, we desperately need that program because our caseloads are so bad. But the truth is, we lose quality control. So when you hire a private attorney, and we've hired some amazing private attorneys to take these dockets, they do not have the same commitment, and they're also taking on volume they're not used to. The other thing is, just because we're having a private attorney go in and handle the cases, doesn't mean our support staff don't have to prepare those cases for trial. Basically, we have to get them together, get them to the attorneys, and then we have to track what happens to those cases. Lastly, when we did the RAP program, as it's called, that's one day. If a case is continued or a jury trial is paid, that attorney is not responsible for it, so some of those cases come back to us. Essentially, we lose quality control, we lose all control over how that case goes forward. And the attorneys who are doing an amazing job, I don't want to suggest that the private attorneys we're using aren't vested, and we don't have the quality control over their practice the way we would over our own.
Got it, clear. Senator Salem.
Thank you, and thank you for the testimony. Just reading through this and seeing some of the turnover that you have, and trouble with the recruitment, and noticing that you're losing probably your senior people that's there, which is a problem, is just the pay, trying to give the right pay, as we're down at the bottom, I guess you're saying, the pay. Is that the only problem that we have?
Well, let me start, and then I'll turn it over to you. I think this, Keith called it the great resignation. It's not unique to the Public Defender's Office. It really is a national issue. But Caleb pointed out a major problem, and that is when we lose experienced attorneys, and when there is a backlog of jury trials, we're not training up our new entry people so that they can handle the more experienced cases. So that's a major problem. And so obviously our strategy is the talent pool that's coming into the Public Defender's Office is first class. It really is. That hasn't diminished somewhat. The problem that we have now is when our more experienced attorneys leave, where we don't have the ability to train the newer people up in time for them to take over the more serious cases. So we're probably paneling more cases than we should be, but it's clearly a problem. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
The only thing I'd add is that if you're an experienced attorney, I'll give you an example, if I may. I was recently the District Public Defender in Prince George's County. Our more experienced attorneys in history had been carrying 10 to 12, 15 sometimes. It was a lot of life cases at a time. Last fall, there were over 30 life cases, plus a number of other cases. So you're looking at 60, 70 cases, 30 of which are life cases.
In a life case is a
Murder, rape.
is where the penalty is
Low,
low.
serious.
Yeah.
So if you're an experienced attorney and you're looking ahead and you have retirement as an option, your next 2 years is beyond busy. And COVID's been hard on everybody. So I would say it's our salaries. And again, we did have a payment, we did raise some salaries, but that was for people with the biggest disparities. If you were a more senior attorney, you probably didn't get that raise. So they're not getting more money. They're seeing that their caseload's going to skyrocket. And quite frankly, if you are the federal public defender, if you're PDS, if you're anybody else, our attorneys have more trial experience and are very good than almost anybody else. You can go to one of those agencies, work less, and make more.
What a phenomenon is that we're losing a lot of our experienced attorneys to the federal public defender,
Right.
or to PDS in DC.
Which I would think would be expected, because bottom line, the pay.
The pay.
They know what they're going to be receiving
Absolutely.
here compared to the federal or even another state.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. This is going to end the portion with the agency with Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question. We understand and we certainly see the attorney numbers. Could you speak to the vacancy of staff and the challenges that you have with your staff dealing with this? I think think you may have touched on it briefly, but the turnover for staff and your projection on how you're going to keep the staff, because the attorneys can't work as a staff on the board, so.
Well, I don't think there's a secret to that either, Senator. It's pay. And the Great Resignation has affected not only attorneys, but also core staff. And so it's important for us to get increase in salaries for our core staff so that we are competitive. And quite frankly, we're not. We're not competitive at this point. And so if people are seeking other opportunities and they can find them elsewhere, they will. So that's a big issue that we're working on. Anything you want to add?
Can I mention one thing? I just want to make clear a couple things that actually have happened. We, like all the agencies, were under a hard hiring freeze in 2020. So we're coming off of that, and that's particularly harmful to us because while we recruit twice a year in September and February, we fell quite far behind in that year.
Can we switch you out because the audience can't see you from?
Sorry. So one thing, and we put in for salary increases for our.
What happens is it's recorded, so the audience, yeah.
Sorry. So we put in salary increases and have for many years. There's no magic to it, but there are different tracks that you can take to get that approved. And what we were able to do, because as we came off the hiring freeze, was to leverage our vacancies to increase the starting salaries for attorneys. And that allowed us to put through significant equity increases for our attorneys. And those were effective July 1st of this current fiscal year. The core staff falls under a different type of hiring practices, but we have formal, structured, organizational and salary structure requests into DBM that are pending review right now. So those should help to both elevate the salaries that are paid to current staff, allow us to raise the salaries at which we recruit, correct the career paths so that there are more variations in the senior attorney positions that can allow them to progress beyond that area where they tend to leave. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay, so if you could you keep us abreast of, you said that DBM is now reviewing the staff package or the staff proposal, as well as for the attorneys. Could you just keep us informed on where you are and how that's progressing? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Senator. Perfect piece of it, and we'll ask Caleb to make sure that we follow up on this from that standpoint. Colleagues, this will end the portion where the agency is responding. We're going to bring up witnesses. We have a couple witnesses that wanted to comment. Mr. DeWolf, Mr. Lotridge, we just wanted to say thank you all for your leadership, especially navigating a pandemic and on such an important issue. So thank you again. And I think that on behalf of the committee, it is more than appropriate to say we wish you congratulations on your retirement.
Thank you so much, Senator.
Yes, sir.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
At this time, I'll bring up Ms. Denise Gilmore from AFSCME, Rachel Bennett, and if Cassie O'Neill can just hang in the wing, we're going to bring you up very, very quickly. We're going to ask that you limit your testimony to 2 minutes. We do have 3 more agencies after this.
Certainly. Good afternoon. My name is Denise Gilmore, and I'm a field director with AFSCME Council 3. We represent the attorneys, social workers, paralegals, investigators, clerical staff at the Office of the Public Defender who have chartered a local with us. This is going to be extremely short. I think in probably the first time that I am testifying in front of you, I can honestly say we agree with everything the deputy district, I'm sorry, I want to make sure I get your title right. Public Defenders, I apologize, has said. I do want to caution the committee against thinking this is a problem that was just created within the last year. This has the underfunding, the maintaining of vacancies, underfunding staff salaries to keep them competitive. It's something that we've seen going on for several years now, and that's why we're at this crisis now. It's not a result of just the Great Resignation that has happened during the pandemic. I'm glad there is discussion about raising attorney salaries. We absolutely have to do that. We need to raise the salaries of all the staff that are in the office as well. You can see they create just as important of a role in the office as attorneys and doing the case defense, and we need to see all the positions properly funded. I'll conclude by saying, in our written testimony, our national union has done quite a bit of research in looking at the funding of the Office of the Public Defender versus, the rate at which funding increases have occurred for the state's attorney's office here in Maryland and for the Office of the Attorney General. It's pretty startling how much the salaries raise in the counties, how much the funding raise in the counties, but not for the statewide office. And I think we are certainly very interested in continuing to work with this committee and the administration in figuring out a better funding formula for our Office of the Public Defender, because if we're going to be truly committed to indigent defense, we need to make sure that we've got a funding source that is going to bring the caseloads much further down. They're way too high right now. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Bennett.
Thank you and good afternoon. I am an attorney. I work with the Office of the Public Defender, where I've been for the last 9 years. I'm also a member of AFSCME Local 423. I work in our Baltimore County office. I represent clients who are charged with felony offenses. Our caseloads are too high. Right now, I represent 70 people charged with felonies. I would say the majority of my clients are facing 20 years or more in prison. I right now have 5 cases where my clients are facing life in prison, but as you heard earlier, I have colleagues who have twice that number. My colleagues in the district court, they go into court daily with 15, 20 cases scheduled for trial. In Baltimore County, if someone applies for a public defender when they're arrested and they're charged with a felony, they typically wait 6 weeks before an attorney is assigned to their case. So that means they could be sitting in the jail for 6 weeks before they have an attorney to help them with things like getting a bail review or finding witnesses for their defense. We hire, as you've heard, bright and talented, hardworking attorneys, but we're not retaining them. And the part of the problem is salary, and part of the problem is workload. An example is a colleague of mine who loved this job, was a mentor to his peers. When he had a child, he realized there was no way that he could manage the obligations to his clients and start a family. Those are things that we should be able to do. There is a psychological toll to our job as well. It is difficult. And we feel an obligation to meet our clients' needs. When we don't have the people and the resources to do that, it's our clients who are the most vulnerable folks in Maryland who suffer.
Thank you. Ms. O'Neill.
Good afternoon. My name is Casey O'Neill. I'm a social worker at the Public Defender's Office, and I'm a member of the Maryland Defenders Union, AFSCME Local 423. Social workers meet our clients on some of the worst days of their lives, and our involvement can turn those moments of crisis into points of opportunity for them to truly change their lives. I work with youth in Baltimore City who've been charged with serious offenses, and what I see over and over again is the impact of trauma. And the kids I work with, what I see is that they're desperate for stability, they're desperate for healing, and for caring adults to be in their lives. By working with their families and connecting them with resources, I see that they're finally able to get the help that they need, and they go on to graduate from high school and start their careers, and they get another chance. OPD really does serve the most vulnerable people in Maryland, and every single one of those people would benefit from having a social worker, but very few get one. So for example, in my office, we have 13 attorneys, each with their own large caseload, and 1 social worker. So there is no way for me to work with all of those kids. And I also get assignments from other offices because they don't have enough social workers either. And on top of that, just like the attorneys, I'm really overwhelmed with administrative tasks because we lack enough paralegals and support staff to help with those administrative things. the core staff that we do have, they basically do the jobs of 2 or 3 people, and they don't even make a living wage. And OPD has tried to address this understaffing with temporary grant positions and contracts, but the need we have for forensic social workers and for experienced core staff who have legal expertise is a permanent need. Our work really does benefit the community. It saves Maryland money, and we need more of us. So we are just here asking if there's a budget surplus in the state should be investing in more of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Saley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you both for your testimony. Being a Baltimore County Senator, I would like the opportunity maybe to have offline, maybe we could talk about some of the problems that we do have in
Absolutely.
our county. I know in the district that you're in and the senator also, that maybe we could talk about some of the things that are important to us, and we know it's important to you, and more important to you. So maybe we can talk offline and maybe have
Yes,
an
we would love
opportunity
to do that.
so.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Just wanted to reiterate Senator Saling's comments on behalf of the entire subcommittee. Just we're thankful for the work that you all do. You all are the people that are on the front lines. I just wanted to reiterate what was stated there, because that's all of our sentiments. Colleagues, I see no further questions, so this will end the public hearing for the Office of Public Defender. Just wanted to reiterate again, Mr. Weiss, just thank you for your due diligence and thorough report. At this time, we're going to move on to the State Lottery and Gaming Control. We're going to ask Ms. Emily Haskell for the analysis report. And Ms. Haskell, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Again, my name is Emily Haskell, and I'll be presenting the budget analysis for the State Lottery and Gaming Control Agency. In the budget summary on page 1, you can see the agency's budget increases by about 5% in the fiscal 2023 allowance to $116 million. General funds increase by nearly $5 million in order to implement sports betting, and special funds stay mostly flat. They increase by just over 0.5% after accounting for deficiencies, with increases in lottery central system, personnel, and advertising costs offset by the decrease from the special fund deficiency in fiscal 2022 for sports betting. And the first item I want to discuss is the Vax Cash Promotion. In fiscal 2021, the agency used $2 million from its advertising budget to incentivize Marylanders to get vaccinated, beginning in May, with prizes awarded through July 4th. Exhibit 1 shows Maryland's 7-day average of vaccinations, and the timing of the promotion is shown in between the 2 red bars. Just recently, just this month, the governor announced another round of the Vax Cash Promotion, this time encouraging Marylanders to get their booster shots. The funding for this round is also $2 million, but the fund source is going to come from federal funds from the American Rescue Plan. The promotion began earlier this week and will finish with a $1 million drawing on May 3rd. Next, you can see in Exhibit 2 on page 4, most of the allowance is for the lottery program, while 16% is for the casino or video lottery terminal side, and the new sports betting program accounts for 4% of the allowance. Exhibit 4 shows the lottery sales and distributions. The lottery hit a new record level of sales in fiscal 2021, increasing by nearly 20% from the prior year to $2.6 billion. General fund revenues in fiscal 2021 totaled more than $630 million. Next, turning to the casino side, revenues have mostly bounced back from their big pandemic dip in fiscal 2020. Exhibit 7 here shows the VLT revenues and distributions. Fiscal 2021 revenues actually exceeded the fiscal 2019 level, despite capacity restrictions at the casinos for most of the year. VLT has contributed over $440 million to the Education Trust Fund in fiscal 2021, and the Board of Revenue estimates projects a further increase in fiscal 2022. Exhibit 8 shows table game revenues, which have also rebounded a bit, but they're still below pre-pandemic levels. And table games generated about $88 million for the Education Trust Fund in fiscal 2021. Now I'll turn to sports betting. As you're all aware, Maryland voters approved the referendum in November 2020 authorizing sports betting, and last session, Chapter 356 established the framework for sports betting operations. Application fees for licenses will fund the agency's operating expenses in fiscal 2022 for a proposed deficiency of $2.1 million. And 5% of the fees paid by the larger sports betting operators will also be used to establish a new sports wagering assistance fund in the Department of Commerce to assist small businesses entering the sports betting market. And the remainder of the application fees will go to the Blueprint Fund, as will 15% of the revenues from sports betting. The fiscal 2023 allowance includes $4.8 million in general funds for sports betting program operations. And general funds are used in fiscal 2023 in place of special funds due to the inconsistent availability of licensing fees after the larger casino operators applied for their licenses in fiscal 2022. There's also a proposed deficiency adding 40 regular positions and 6 contractual positions for the sports betting program, including compliance officers, auditors, and accounting staff. And the agency has started hiring for these positions using existing vacant pins in the lottery program. Licenses have been approved so far for 5 of Maryland's 6 casinos, as well as a few off-track betting facilities. And sports wagering at the casinos got its start in early December. This exhibit, Exhibit 9, shows the total handle as well as the revenues for December, including about $470,000 for the Blueprint Fund. In January, the revenues increased almost 40% to $644,000. Finally, this page shows the DLS recommendation, which is to concur with the governor's allowance. And that concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Haskell. Seeing no questions from the committee at the time, I would like to bring up Mr. John Martin, now Director for State Lottery and Gaming Control Agency, and his team.
Good afternoon, Chairman McCray and the members of the Public Safety, Transportation, and Environment Subcommittee of the Senate Budget and Taxation Committee. I welcome the opportunity to appear before you today to present the Maryland Lottery and Gaming Control Agency's fiscal 2023 budget. At this time, I would like to thank the Department of Legislative Services, and particularly Emily Haskell, for her excellent work and analysis of our budget. I would also like to thank Jesse Rowe and the Department of Budget and Management for their assistance in developing the agency's FY23 budget. With me today, to my right, is Paula Yoakum, our Chief Financial Officer, Angela Jones, our Budget Specialist, and James Butler, Assistant Deputy Director and Chief of Staff. I'd like to begin by giving you an update on our current business across all 3 sectors. Coming off of a record-setting sales and revenue year in fiscal 21, we are ahead of that pace as we entered the second half of fiscal 22. Our traditional lottery business is strong for both our scratch-off instant ticket business as well as our draw game products. We continue to upgrade our product lineup with new and engaging games to responsibly grow sales and increase our revenue contribution. We're on pace to be about 4 to 5% ahead of our record $2.6 billion in lottery sales for FY21. As you know, we also regulate the casino gaming business and the emerging fantasy gaming competitions and sports wagering industries. In our post-pandemic world, we see all 6 casinos exceeding their revenue contribution in FY22 as attendance counts return to more normal numbers. Sports wagering debuted in December with the issuance of licenses to 5 of the 6 casinos. After 2 months of reporting, we've realized slightly over $1 million in taxes that support the blueprint for Maryland's Future Fund. We have 3 more entities, all off-track betting locations, that we anticipate will enter the sports wagering market over the next 2 to 3 months. As it relates to the FY23 budget, we concur with the DLS recommended action. I am happy to answer any questions you may have at this time, Chairman.
Thank you. Can you remind me if OTBs were Class A or Class B?
The OTBs are Class B licensees.
And the Class A's are the ones that have been awarded at this time, right?
Well, it's actually been a combination. Right now, it's just been the Class A's, the 5 of the 6 casinos. And then the next 3 will be the OTBs, Long Shots in Frederick, Riverboat on the Potomac, down on the banks of the Potomac River, and Greenmount Station in Hampstead.
So Class Bs are still impacted by the disparity study with the Attorney General's office, correct?
The non-competitive licenses will be impacted by that, Chairman, correct. The ones that were named in legislation, of which the 3 OTBs were named, are excluded from that.
So there are some Class Bs that are impacted, and obviously we've already awarded the Class As. Do you believe that even though they are named in the bill, and I agree, we did the bill, Budget and Tax did the bill, do you see any competitive disadvantage for those Class Bs that have not even got an opinion from the Attorney General's office in reference to the disparity study about how we'll proceed forward?
Are you speaking specifically, Mr. Chairman, of the ones named in legislation?
Yeah.
No, I think the legislation as it was written and is being implemented, there's enough geographical spread between these locations that will address, I mean, I mentioned Frederick, Hampstead, and actually Colonial Beach, Virginia being the 3. They're fairly well dispersed from the existing locations.
Okay, and the only thing I think about, how long is the time frame in reference to being approved?
Well, being approved is really a function, Mr. Chairman, of when the information comes to us. So once we get all the information from the entities, the approval process is relatively quick. I would say within a 30-day process.
Okay, all right. Senator Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think one time you told me how this worked, but in the big games, Powerball, Mega Ball, when you get these big jackpots out there that everybody really gets wide-eyed about, the revenue we generate from that, is that only on the sales within our state, or is this somehow spread out among all the states that participate in these 2 programs?
Well, the revenue that's generated, the sales stay within the states. And then, as you're well aware from last year's significant win in Lonaconing, once a jackpot winner wins and they are in the state of Maryland, we then benefit from the tax on that win.
So, for clarification again, whatever sold in Maryland stays in Maryland, basically.
Correct.
What you're saying. Okay, thank you. And it's a good thing that you can stay anonymous because nobody knows yet who that person or people are. Probably enjoying it somewhere on a nice long vacation.
Seeing no further questions, Director Martin, I think that obviously you've been in this position for a while now, but this is our formal way of just saying congratulations and matriculating into this position, and wish you nothing but longevity, and just thanking you and your team for the work that they also do in reference to making sure that we move in the proper way as the state of Maryland. Ms. Haskell, thank you as usual for the due diligence and detailed and commitment in reference to this analysis. Colleagues, this ends the hearing for lottery and gaming. We're going to move on to MDOT, the Secretary's office, and we're asking Mr. Steve McCullough to please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Give us the analysis.
Some technical difficulty. Mine, isn't it? It's
it's not showing what's on my screen. I apologize, there's technical difficulties. We'll just proceed. So, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Steve McCullough with Department of Legislative Services, here to present the Secretary's Office for the Maryland Department of Transportation. The Secretary's Office budget, operating budget, increased by $1.2 million over the current year to $101.8 million. On page 5, starting the managing for results, Exhibit 1 shows the number of filled positions that the department has. And as of January 1 of this year, the department had 186 fewer filled positions than last year, which kind of is mirroring what you've been hearing with other agencies. And Exhibit 2 on page 6 shows the monthly vacancy rate for the department by business unit for calendar 2021. And as you can see from that exhibit, the general trend on the vacancy rate, is upwards. I would note that for the department, the department-wide vacancy rate ended the year at about 10% vacancy. And for a big department, MDOT is actually doing pretty well. You've seen some of the other large departments throughout the state with vacancies, approaching or exceeding 20%. So they are still doing, relatively well, but obviously they do important work, and they can't do that without people in the office and out on the roads. Exhibit 3 shows system preservation funding as a managing for results metric. The department has a goal of spending at least $850 million per year on system preservation, and this chart shows that they've been able to meet that and are projected to meet that in the current year and in the allowance year. Exhibit 4 on page 8 shows the spending that the Secretary's Office does by unit, and this exhibit shows that nearly half of the spending for the Secretary's Office goes to the technology services, which supports the entire department. So a lot of their IT expertise is located there, and many of the systems are also funded through that program. Exhibit 5 shows the governor's proposed budget. As I had indicated at the beginning, the operating budget does increase by $1.2 million over the current year. That's a 1.2% increase. Personnel expenses increased by $1.3 million. A lot of that is related to health, employee and primary health spending. There is also some savings in the administration section of the budget, which decreases by $1.8 million. That is largely due to the fact that the department's headquarters building was just paid off. So the last bonds were paid off in fiscal 2022, and so they are now mortgage-free. Other grants and aid increased by $437 million, $1,000, and other cost allocations for the department decreased by just over $600,000. Exhibit 6 on page 10 shows the operating grant and aid funding, and most of the grant recipients are the metropolitan planning organizations. So there's a lot of federal funds, as you can see from this chart, with matching state funds that come in. Looking at personnel on page 11, there's just a decrease of half a position in the regular budgeted and no change in the full-time equivalent contractual positions. That half a position represents an interdepartmental transfer. Over the entire department, there are no change in the number of positions between the allowance and the current year working. Exhibit 7 on page 12 starts a look at the capital program for the Secretary's Office, and Exhibit 7 shows the 6-year planned spending by category. And you can see that the department's capital program as currently planned does show decrease between the current year working appropriation, and it just generally gradually declines through 2027. I will note that that is a familiar pattern that the Secretary's office often will see an increase in the current year because they have a lot of smaller projects as there are cash flow issues with other projects that may be delayed. They then can move some of the departmental smaller projects in and fund those as they go. Exhibit 8 shows the fiscal 2023 projects and programs in the capital program. And the first item listed is one of the new programs that's driving the spending in the Secretary's office, and that is a new project to modernize the accounting and reporting system. They started a similar project last year for the procurement system, so they are in the process of updating and modernizing many of their core information systems. Exhibit 9 shows the PAYGO cash flow, and the interesting item on this chart, the green section of the middle bar, is general funds. The general funds aren't generally budgeted in MDOT, but last session in the supplemental budget, there was $8.7 million added for a project in Prince George's County as a grant to the county. And you can see that on Exhibit 10 on page 15. That's the infrastructure along the Blue Line corridor. That's an $8.7 million grant, again, in general funds, which is a bit unusual. Exhibit 11 on page 16 just continues to show the cash flow, the addition of that in total between the working and the allowance. Capital spending for the Secretary's office is down by $6.7 million. Exhibit 12 just shows the major changes from last year's Consolidated Transportation Program. That's the addition of the reporting, accounting and reporting modernization project and that Blue Line corridor process. The one issue raised in this analysis is to talk about the new capital management and programming system, or CMAPS, that has just come online in the last couple of years, that MDOT uses to as a central repository for all of its capital project information and to enable it to track projects and report on those projects. This will have benefits for the General Assembly going forward because, as seen in Exhibit 13, this is the new section summary, and I picked the Maryland Transit Administration for this exhibit because it has all of the subcategories and all of the programs. But in prior year CTPs, for the summary page, you would only have seen a few lines. Major construction projects, development evaluation would be in one line, and minor programs. And so, as you can see from this exhibit, these subcategories, which we'll look at in the next exhibit, will allow a much better understanding of how funds are being programmed in the capital program. Exhibit 14 then explains what these new subcategories, which the department is calling investment categories, represent. So system preservation, taking care of the things that we already have, expansion and efficiency projects, projects that will address safety and security, local funding. There's a lot of funds that the department has in its budget that are actually paid out to local governments. And then there are also projects addressing environment, and then everything else that's basically supports the departmental operations that are not forward-facing to the public are categorized as administration type projects. What that does, as Exhibit 15 on page 20 shows, is you take a look at various ways of looking at the capital funding for the department. And Exhibit 15 basically shows across the whole department how the capital budget is split up among these investment categories. So you can see that of the $3.2 billion in fiscal 2023, system preservation is the largest funding category at $1.3 billion, and you can see on down the line. And again, moving forward, it'll be very helpful because as we get into the next year and the following year, we'll have some history where you'll be able to see the changes in each of these categories, where before it was just kind of, it really was those big categories and not always apparent how things were changing. The recommended actions begin on page 21. There are 2 recommended actions that are annual budget bill language. The first would cap the level of special funds for the operating grants in aid. The second recommended action on page 22 is to provide oversight of grants exceeding $500,000 that are not listed in the current CTP. I will note that there is an updated section that's included every year that gives the status of various transit-oriented development projects. I'm not going to go through that, but those are there if you have any in your district or areas that you're interested in. That gives a snapshot of what's occurred in the past year and what they expect to happen in the current year. And that concludes my presentation, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. McCulloch. Seeing no questions from the body at this time, want to bring up secretary reports, but I also want to acknowledge it's good to see you in your new role.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Chairman. I appreciate that. So good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. For the record again, my name is Jim Port, Secretary for Maryland Department of Transportation. And today I have with me Heather Murphy, the Director of Planning and Capital Programming, and Jacqueline Hartman, our Chief Financial Officer, to help answer any questions. So it's a pleasure to be here to discuss the Secretary's office today. As always, I want to thank Steve for his excellent work that he does. I don't have to explain it to you. He does great work. In the DLS analysis, we were asked to discuss factors that are contributing to the rise in vacancies across the department. First and foremost, I just want to thank the more than 10,000 hardworking employees of MDOT and MDTA. These men and women are critical to our ability to operate and maintain a transportation network that's open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. They keep the network running in all weather conditions and throughout COVID-19 pandemic. And like many state agencies, we're facing some of the highest vacancy rates that we've had in years. It's important to note, however, that we're just coming off of the hiring freeze that lasted for more than a year, and the vacancies crept up during that time. When the hiring freeze was lifted, we were faced with a job market where prospective employees were really in the driver's seat and are able to be very selective about what jobs they take. We've been seeing fewer qualified applicants or applicants that only want full-time teleworking, which as an operating unit we can't really offer all the time. Even without the current job market environment, there are a lot of challenges to recruiting and retaining state employees. Over the years, as fiscal conditions changed, the pay and benefits for MDOT employees has been impacted. For example, pay for state employees has always been supplemented by generous benefits packages that the state offers, but most of those benefits have changed over the years, and they may not have the same value to job seekers. For example, the pension reform brought a change to the state's vesting period from 5 to 10 years, but a lot of these newer employees don't plan to stay for 10 years, so that's not a benefit to them, quite frankly. And in addition to many of the MDOT jobs are public-facing, and those can be difficult to fill in a world where health concerns are related to COVID-19 continue to be an important consideration, and in a way, in how we interact with the rest of the world. The positions like customer service agents at MVA, transit operators, and at the MTA, and law enforcement positions are all impacted by this. Some of the jobs that are hardest for the MDOT to fill are those where it is most competition with the private sector and other public sector entities like maintenance technicians, highly skilled trades like plumbers and electricians, like you, Mr. Chairman. We could use you. You're an electrician, right? Information technology, emergency dispatchers, and accounting. And unfortunately, our human resources office are not immune to vacancies. So as we lose personnel there, it makes the recruitments across the board take longer. So we recognize the high vacancy rates and that it creates more workload for employees that we do have. And we certainly don't want to over-rely on their hard work and dedication. With that vacancy rate at these levels, It's going to take us some time to return to more normal staffing levels, but we're committed to continuing to focus on filling these vacancies. The analysis includes 2 recommended actions, both annual pieces of the budget bill language. We concur with both. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I will echo the chair on your appointment. I'm looking at your response, and you mentioned it in your comments as well, the number of, a decrease in the number of qualified applicants. Could you expound on that more? I know COVID has been impactful for all of us, but that kind of stood out with me from your statement, that you have a decrease in the number of qualified applicants for positions. Can you expound on that a little bit?
Sure. So I would say that in some cases, like the CDL drivers, for example, for MTA and some of our other facilities like SHA and all, they're not coming to us with a CDL. And so we have to bring them in at a lower level and ramp them up. And sometimes when we do that, after we train them, then they start looking somewhere else to get better pay. So it's one, they're not fully trained when they come to us, then we train them and then we might lose them. And that's a recurring thing. And then, of course, when I talk about the plumbers and electricians, both of which the chairman and I are, I'm a journeyman gas fitter, they're not coming to us with this, the higher level criteria, and we need some like high voltage electricians, and we can't attract them, so we end up getting a lower level, more like a trainee type position, and then having to train them up as we move along.
Gotcha. All right, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Maureen.
We're,
Senator Salem.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, congratulations, Secretary. We see in a lot of our departments this problem of keeping our employees, keeping good qualified people to be a part of the administration and part of the different departments. And I know a lot of times when you get underqualified people that you want to have in a position of a qualified job, that they go and they leave. But I know some places of employment, they tell them that if we hire you, we want to make sure that you sign this, that you will be with us at least 5 years. And sometimes that helps you out. I don't know if you could do something like that, but I think that would benefit every department, that to get good qualified people, that you have the better opportunity to keep that good person for 5 years, and maybe within that time, he'll stay another 5. Maybe he'll stay a period of time to retire. And I know, again, right now, it's been very hard to get qualified people, let alone to get people to be qualified in a position. And are we, in every department that you have, do we have places maybe in step that you do have some person that's a qualified CDL or anything that they can insert in every department opportunity for that training? Thank you, Mr.
So, great question, Senator. As a matter of fact, I've had some of those talks with the folks that are in our response centers, the ones that are on the highway responding to people that are broken down and all. And one of the things I just mentioned to Senator Jackson is that, you know, a lot of times they don't come to us with a CDL, and then we pay to get them trained up, and then they leave us. So one of the things I asked is, can't we, if we train them, if we pay for their CDL and pay for their training, can we put like a 2-year or 3-year obligation for that payment? And so we are looking into that issue, I can assure you. And I think, you know, there may be some opportunities to do that in other areas. If we're like, if we get a plumber or a electrician and they don't have the proper licensing and we send them to the classes, there may be opportunities to do that too. I haven't looked at that quite yet. However, I am working with Senator Rosa on ways that we can enhance our ability to attract high school kids that are in the trades. You know, it's been often said that, you know, everybody needs a college education. Well, quite frankly, everybody's not going to get a college education. There are a lot of people who are in the trades and come up through the trades. And I think that we should have an emphasis on working with those kids, bring them in at an early age, show them the benefits of working for state government, and get them the training and maybe certifications that they need, have them stay with us for a while, and hopefully stay with us for a long time. So we are looking on it. I'm working with HR right now, with Senator Rosa on that very issue.
And I think it's a great opportunity, and I believe you do have the right person to help you out as a senator, because I know how much, and we've talked about many times about the trade and the trade field that's out there. And if we could expand that, if we could maybe get opportunities for places of training that have, you can be certified, I think would make a difference. So thank you, Mr. Secretary, and thank you, Mr.
Thank
Chairman.
you.
Senator Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations, Jim.
Thank you, sir.
I don't know if this is for you or Steve, but I should have looked at these on others. I'm looking at the line item budget, number 6, fuel and utilities. Shows a decrease of 6.4%, which in a time that fuel prices are going up considerably, I don't know why that would be decreased other than you did talk about telecommuting and so forth. That seems like a pretty big decrease. So I don't know if you were over last year and didn't use it and said we need to cut it. It just seems with the price of fuel going up about every day, why we would have a 6.4% decrease in the budget in that particular line.
I may have to get back to you on that one, only because it may be a lag time from when it dropped to now, where the prices are going up much faster, as we know. So it might be that, but let me work with our folks. We have folks that work specifically on utility issues, whether it be solar, electric, gas, everything. So I probably had to circle back with some of those folks to get the exact answer, if you don't mind.
No, that's fine. It just caught my eye. It seemed like with the
Sure.
price of fuel and everything else going up, that we would have that kind of a decrease percentage-wise in that line item. Thank you, Mr.
Nothing gets by you.
Thank you. And Secretary Ports, if you could just make sure that we all get a copy of that response, that would be
Sure.
very helpful. Senator Jackson, were you coming back for a second bite at the apple?
Actually, I was. I thought Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thought I saw it in the package, but I'd just like to, so the contracts, underlying contracts when you hire certain employees or in certain disciplines. So I come from the public safety world, as you know, and agencies' ability or challenges on retaining folks, has always been, particularly where you are, natural capital region or versus state. And so there are contracts, there are plenty of, examples of contracts that we've used over the years that, once I hire you and put you through the training process, you have to stay there for a few years. I know there's an underlying challenge in July of 2011, when the state went from 5-year investment to 10-year investment. That makes that challenge a little different. And, look, as a government, sometimes we don't evolve as quickly as our customers do, A lot of folks, 10 years to a person fresh out of college or a person fresh in the workplace seems like eons.
Forever.
5 years a little more attainable, but there are examples of that that's already out there. And I'd love to talk to you about that further.
Sure.
I think, getting folks on board and ensuring that there is a realistic career track for them is important. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions from the committee, Secretary Ports, just thank you for your leadership, welcoming your ascension into the new position, and wishing you longevity.
Thank you.
Mr. McCulloch, as usual, just thank you for your due diligence. And colleagues, this ends the hearing for MDOT's, the Secretary's office, and we'll move to our last hearing of the day, Department of Juvenile Services, and we have the phenomenal Madeline Miller giving the report. And Madeline, the stage is yours.
All right, let me get the computer all hooked up. Are you able to see my, yes, there that is. Okay, good afternoon. My name is Madeline Miller, and today I will be presenting the budget analysis for the Department of Juvenile Services. The fiscal 23 budget increases $24.8 million, or about 9.4%. Most of the change is the result of the transfer of the Juvenile Services Education Program from the Maryland State Department of Education to DJS in fiscal 2023. This will add 173 positions and a proposed budget of about $22.4 million for DJS to provide educational programming and services to all juveniles placed in DJS-operated detention and residential facilities. Normally, I would begin with my performing for results, but I just wanted to take a quick second to note in the program description that units in DJS normally are put into two categories, with the first being administration and support, and the second being for community and facility developments. Effective July 1st, 2021, the regional community teams are now organized around 8 regions rather than 6 as they were in the past. The makeup of those regions is described on this page, and the department reports that the change was made to promote opportunities for collaboration and as well also to align with the Maryland judicial courts, the judicial circuits. So now I'll begin the performance analysis with Exhibit 1. Within Maryland, total juvenile arrests have generally fallen over the past decade, but the change was rather dramatic between calendar year 2016 through 2020. Total juvenile arrests over the 5 years that are shown here are down 50.7%, and with changes largely being driven with property crimes and Part 2 arrests, but also with the percent for violent crimes decreasing about 37% as well. Next, I will move to complaints and dispositions. Exhibit 2 shows both the total number of complaints received by DJS over the past decade and their dispositions. 47.7% of complaints were closed at intake in fiscal 2020, and that figure remains at 47.2% in fiscal 2021. The dispositions that are shown in red are those that were referred to informal interventions. They made up 17% of dispositions in fiscal 2021. The formal cases shown in blue are those that required court intervention. They made up 41.3% of dispositions, but over the last decade, the total number of cases required formal intervention has fallen about 81.7%. While complaints over the last decade have fallen, fiscal 2022 year-to-date data suggests that there could be an increase, driven largely by the reopening of schools. DLS projects an increase of about 26.2%, which would still have complaints be below their fiscal 2020 levels. Next, I'll discuss non-residential caseloads and population trends. Youth receiving informal supervision who are on probation and youth and aftercare programming make up the DJS non-residential caseloads. Consistent with the number of complaints, the non-residential population has also declined over the past decade. Exhibit 3 shows that caseloads have dropped 80.4% since fiscal 2021. Probation cases are projected to be historically low in fiscal 2022, consistent with efforts taken to keep youth from becoming court involved. Moving now to Exhibit 4. The youth that require court intervention become part of the DJS detained population. Exhibit 4 shows trends for youth that are in the secure detention predisposition population, the pending placement population, and the adult court authorized population. Exhibit 4 shows that the total secure detention population was beginning to stabilize prior to the pandemic, that the adult court authorized youth have made up a larger share of the population over time. Adult court population now accounts for 52.9% of the detained population, which is the second year in a row that the adult court population has made up over half of the detained population. Since 2019, when the detained average daily population was 280, ADP has fallen to 140 in fiscal 2022. And in addition to the drop in referrals to DJS, changes to the judiciary's operations have reduced detained and committed populations. On April 13th, 2020, then Chief Judge Mary Ellen Barbara issued an order directing local courts to find alternatives to detaining juveniles in facilities to minimize their risk of contracting COVID-19. The judiciary has operated in various phases of its reopening plan since then. Different phases have different rules for what cases can be heard and how different cases are given different priority. So currently there's priority scheduling for juveniles turning 21 within 90 days of December 29th, 2021, which that date was when the judiciary entered phase 3 again in response to the most recent surge in COVID-19 cases. Exhibit 5, shown here, depicts another way in which these changes have impacted the DJS population. Though ADP continued to decrease compared with pre-pandemic levels, the average length of stay has increased over time for the predisposition, pending placement, and adult court authorized populations. ALOS for youth pending placement increased 29.5% between 2019 and 2021, and ALOS for the adult court authorized population increased 43.2% in the same period. Now I'll be discussing committed residential population trends. This is shown in Exhibit 6 on page 11. The committed ADP declined by about 168 youth, or 53.5% between fiscal 2020 and 2021. The largest change in fiscal 2021 occurred in the out-of-state placements portion. DJS has made efforts during the pandemic to bring youth back in-state and reduce the number of placements made out-of-state. Fiscal 2020 year-to-date ADP for out-of-state youth is only 7. I'll also note that per diem placements, programs which are operated by private providers where the state pays only for the number of days that a youth is actually placed in the program, the per diem ADP decreased about 45% between fiscal 2020 and 2021. Now moving to some re-entry data. DJS manages youth re-entry process. Outcomes of follow-up visits from DJS re-entry specialists are shown in Exhibit 7. Most of the performance measures remain stable between fiscal 2020 and 2021, with all but one experiencing a net change of less than 4 percentage points. The percent of families committed youth attending youth re-entry planning meetings was the one exception to this, however. This measure increased by 11.4 percentage points in the same period. DJS recidivism measures here, shown in Exhibit 8, provide a greater understanding of how many youths return to the juvenile justice system. Decline of the rearrest rates suggests policing practices are beginning to rearrest youth at a slower rate, and decline in the re-adjudication and recommitment rates suggests that juvenile justice system has been effective in reducing youth involvement in the judicial system. Declines in the 2-year recidivism metrics have now extended to the 3-year metrics. This is a positive indicator that fewer DJS youth are returning to the juvenile justice system. That concludes my performance analysis portion, and I'll now begin the discussion of the department's budget. In fiscal 2021, DJS received $4.9 million in ARPA funds for Level 1 and Level 2 response pay and for quarantine pay. In fiscal 2022, DJS does not receive federal stimulus funds, but does receive a general fund deficiency appropriation of $1.25 million. This will fund supplemental grants for interagency rate committee providers. About $861,000 will be used for per diem expenditures, and $389,000 will be used for educational per diems. The deficiency is required as the IRC increased provider rates for fiscal 2022, and the fiscal 2023 allowance accounts for the provider rate increases. Exhibit 9 shows how the department's allowance is broken down by object. Of the $288.6 million, 72% or $209 million is for regular and contractual personnel within the department. Youth programming accounts for 12% or $34.6 million, and includes purchase of care services and youth education programming. The remaining 16% of funds are allocated toward operating expenses, miscellaneous contractual services, and supplies and equipment for the department. Discussion of the proposed budget change begins on page 16. As I mentioned at the start of my presentation, much of the increase is attributable to the department's assumption of the JSEP. That's detailed a little bit further on the following page with the where it goes chart. In addition to expenses associated with the JSEP, which are broken out separately, the budget adjusts for the needs of the current population, shown in the population-driven adjustments portion. And then another change is a $2 million general grant for Roca, Baltimore, as required by Chapter 596 of 2021. More information about that can be found within the analysis. Next, moving then to further discussion of the population-driven adjustments on Exhibit 11. Within the budget change, funding increases due to the IRC provider rate increases and anticipation of population growth. Exhibit 11 speaks to the relevant interacting trends. As the DJS per diem population dropped, funding for per diem programming declined as well through fiscal 2021 to historically low levels. Per diem funding grows in the working appropriation and in the allowance. As previously discussed, fiscal 2022 year-to-date data suggests that total complaints and disposition figures will be higher than their 2021 levels. Thus, the increase in programmatic funding is appropriate. Further down on the page, there's my personnel data table. The department receives a net increase of 168.4 regular positions, thanks largely to the positions associated with the JSEP. I'll have to scroll down on the screen for this one, but Exhibit 12 includes monthly vacancies for direct care staff and for community direct care staff and residential direct care staff below in blue. One area that has historically been of concern is DJS's ability to maintain adequate staffing levels. The department currently has a vacancy rate of 12.74%, well above its budgeted turnover rate. Exhibit 12 shows the monthly vacancy rates for community and facility direct care staff. Community direct care staff vacancies increased about 8.2 percentage points since the start of fiscal 2021, while further down here on the screen, residential care staff vacancies have also increased 10.7 percentage points in the same period. MFR data related to direct care staff suggests that the average number of days to fill vacant positions in this type of staff increased from 188 days in fiscal 2020 to 197.1 in fiscal 21. DLS asks that DJS comment on recent or planned actions to reduce community and residential direct care staff vacancies. I'll also briefly touch on Exhibit 13, which shows community supervision caseload trends. This shows the monthly caseload trends for all community direct care staff. While this data suggests that caseloads have fallen about 59% per direct care staff, further discussions with the department have revealed that this underestimates the workload of community direct care staff who manage supervision cases. I'll now move to the budget issues portion. The first is that As required by Chapter 147 of 2021, DJS and the Juvenile Services Education Board and Program will have the responsibility of implementing and providing educational programming and services to all youth placed in DJS-operated detention and residential facilities. In addition to the transfer, the law prohibits the disenrollment of a student from their local education system until after the disposition of the youth's case. This creates the opportunity for youth to be enrolled in JSEP educational programming and a local education system at the same time. Preparations for the program transfer are underway, and 2 reports have been published to the Maryland General and shared with the Maryland General Assembly, which detail the transition plan. The JSEP board has stated it will address the dual enrollment issue after the JSEP superintendent is hired. With the implementation of JSEP, it provides an opportunity to improve the educational outcomes of youth in DJS detention and residential facilities. Accordingly, the Department of Legislative Services recommends the addition of committee narrative to require DJS to develop specific JSEP objectives and educational outcome measures for the annual Managing for Results section to be published in fiscal 2024 budget books and subsequent fiscal years. Moving a little bit further in this section, costs associated with JSEP are identified in Exhibit 10, but a few others are broken out here. An initial facility assessment was published in October of 2021. The assessment identifies whether or not there is adequate classroom space in its staff-secure youth centers, hardware-secure committed programs, and detention facilities, the capacity of each facility, and other potential renovations that might support career and technical educational programming. 4 of the 12 recommendations were described with specific cost estimates, and DLS asked that DJS comment on the progress that has been made toward implementing the law and identify sources of funding for potential facility renovations to support the JSEP. The second issue relates to a fiscal audit recently conducted by the Office of Legislative Audits within DLS. Appendix 2 lists the audit's 6 findings, 2 of which are repeat. The first 3 relate to improper procurements and spending that continued after the previous audit findings identified a former employee that circumvented state procurement regulations for personal gain. The 4th finding is that the department's use of certain intergovernmental agreements circumvented state procurement regulations. But the department has responded to this issue and accordingly anticipates that funding for intergovernmental agreements will decrease in fiscal 2023, which is identified in Exhibit 10 in the Where It Goes chart. We ask that DJS brief the Budget Committees on actions taken to address each of the audit findings. Finally, last session, the Budget Committee's restricted funds in the fiscal 2022 budget pending submission of a report providing a 1-year update on the operations of the partnership between the Baltimore City Mayor's Office, the Baltimore City State's Attorney's Office, and Baltimore's Police Department to reduce youth violence in the city. This report was not submitted as of February 12th, but has since been submitted to the Budget Committees. We ask that DLS again recommends that the committees adopt language restricting funds pending the submission of a update detailing the operations of the strategic partnership and associated programmatic expenditures. My recommended actions are described on the next 2 pages of the report, beginning on page 26. With that concludes my analysis of the budget, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Seeing no questions from Ms. Miller, we're going to move directly to the agency. Just would like to welcome Secretary Abed. Secretary Abed, looks like you agree with most of the recommendations, and we do have your written testimony. So if you just wanted to briefly comment, because I know that there are also questions from the thing that I also think you'll get them in with.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the opportunity. Again, Sam Abbott, Secretary for the Department of Juvenile Services. I appreciate the time with you and the members of the committee. With me, I've got Michael D. Batista, our Chief Financial Officer, and our Legislative Director, Andrew Tress, is back there as well. So I did want to, if I could begin, again, yeah, we do agree with the recommendations. Thank you to our budget analyst, Ms. Miller, for doing an excellent analysis and highlighting specifically the crime data that you saw at the beginning of her presentation. And if we look back, I think there were 5 years of data, at least in part of that analysis, and if we look back 10 years and start at the complaint level, and this is the count of charges against youth. So this is really a measure of, youthful criminal activity in the community. Over the last 10 years, those numbers have declined by 78%. So 10 years ago, we had 33,000 complaints against youth across the state. This past year, we had just over 7,000 complaints. So there's been a dramatic reduction in the rate of youthful criminal activity, which is a very good thing for our state. Of course, COVID has had an impact on that. And if you look just 1 year back, from last year to this year, we've seen about a 50% decline. But if you look at those 10 years, if you look at it from that 10-year period, it has declined every single year over those 10-year period. So it has been a significant and steady decline that has been consistent year after year. And so while COVID did drop us significantly more than we would have expected, we were anticipating the numbers to continue trending in that direction. And I'll note that the complaints have dropped in every category. So if we look at subcategories instead of just overall complaints, nonviolent felonies have declined by 69%, misdemeanors have declined by 82%, and crimes of violence have declined by 57%. So we're seeing significant declines everywhere. It's not simply just being driven by low-level offenses going down. Of course, our detention numbers have come down as well considerably, and the rate of youth committed. And I think it was mentioned that our commitments are down over 80%. Youth on probation supervision with probation orders are down over 80%. Our out-of-state population, which used to be a significant problem, is down over 90%. And all the while, we've also seen decreased recidivism as well. So I feel very good about the direction of the department in terms of how we're performing with our youth and the state of things in the community. I will note that, would you like me to respond to the things that the analyst, or did you want to go straight into questions, Mr. Chairman?
Probably go straight into questions. We got the analyst report. You also agreed with many of the things that were there. The first question is, I hope that it doesn't reflect your commitment in reference to those late reports around the Baltimore City Strategic Partnership. I know that obviously it happened this year, but it also was the same behavior in the previous year. I know you agreed to the restriction of the funding, but just wanted to get an understanding of why those reports keep coming in late.
Yes, and I apologize. That was an oversight, and we will not let that happen again. And it was late, so I totally understand the recommendation. However, I would like to say that partnership is something that I'm very proud of, and the work that we're doing with our partners in Baltimore City is really, I think, something to be commended. We have a robust we have set up police diversion programs with the Baltimore Police Department, and I think that's a very important thing for us to support. Of course, DJS does have authority to divert youth, but so do police, and I think it's important that we encourage police to use their diversion authority. We do fund the programs to which those police diversion or the police divert kids to, but I do want the police to get the credit for the diversion, because we recognize that the relationship between the police and the community has been strained, and there's issues of trust, and this is something that can help rebuild that trust by allowing the police to show that they are nuanced and that they can distinguish between, offenders that should be proceeded formally and those that should be diverted and that just need services. We've also got a similar type of arrangement later in the process with the state's attorney's office when they identify cases that they are not going to move forward with for whatever reason. It could be an evidentiary issue or just a judgment call that they don't feel it's appropriate to go forward. We don't want those cases to simply be dismissed or just dropped because oftentimes those kids need resources or services. And so this is a return to intake process with the state's attorneys so that they can identify those cases where they think that these kids do need resources, but that they won't be proceeding for whatever reason in court. They return those to us and we can move forward with them and provide those services like we would have done if it was diverted. And then we also have, I think that was already mentioned, the partnership with Roca, which has been an excellent addition to our partnerships in the community. And the police liaison unit expansion. Again, public safety is one of our highest priorities, and by embedding our staff in the police department so that they can not just, provide information, but provide information where they can answer questions. If you give somebody a report, something could be missed. But if you're working directly with an individual that can interpret what's in that report, then that information becomes much more actionable, and that has been a very positive thing for us as well.
Thank you. Could you, inside that strategic partnership, you mentioned $100,000 to Monty. Could you just briefly let us know if you all set up measurables to that money? And Monty's the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, I believe.
I have to come back to
No
see
problem.
what measures we
Yep.
have for that, if we have measures specifically about that, but we do have that funding. You're
And a
correct.
couple of the questions, maybe you will be given responses afterwards that I'm going to ask for. Average and reference, you talked about warrant apprehension and working with the police department. If you could talk about the average amount, because it looked like y'all make numerous trips, so this is a continuous thing.
The average amount for warrant, I'm sorry, on the warrant,
So in the Baltimore City Strategic Partnership, you talked about warrant apprehensions, working with the police in a coordinated way, I guess, of the young people that may be under your purview. If you could talk about the average amount, I don't know if you all are going out weekly, if you're going out monthly, bi-weekly, but like how many warrants are being served?
well, I will have to get back to you on how often that they do the service of warrants, but we are doing weekly joint visits with Baltimore Police and our high-level kids that are on supervision in the community. So that does occur weekly. And then with warrant apprehension, aside from just the actual apprehension and when those things happen, the other piece is that intelligence piece that we're sharing that information. So when the police have a suspect, if they suspect some individual that's with us and they're on GPS or on electronic monitoring, we can confirm whether somebody was in a place where a crime committed or they weren't. And I think that is very helpful to quickly either zero in or eliminate somebody from, suspicion so that they can continue their investigations. But I will get back with the committee on the frequency of those warrant apprehension task forces.
Inside your partnership report, you talked about curfew visits. If you could get back to us with the average amount of curfew visits, it sounds like you all make this is a weekly thing.
Yes.
I did read that in the report. If you can let us know how many are you making on average from that standpoint. And still quickly, when you talk about the drop in arrests, I'm assuming that you're not talking about juveniles that's charged as adults, but do you all keep that data? So while the arrests are going down, I'm assuming that some of them that are under the purview of DJS, eventually you catch an adult charge, and that's not probably inside of this data, but do you all track that data?
We don't have a perfect vision into that data, because a youth that's charged as an adult does not go into our database, that goes into an adult database. So I would say we have the majority of that information because most of those kids petition to transfer back. And that's how we become aware that they've been charged as an adult, because of that petition back, and we have to submit a report. But those youth that are not eligible for transfer back, we really don't have any visibility on, and that was one of the things that the Juvenile Justice Reform Council had recommended to gather that data and to embed it into GoCap, because, GoCap can sort of reach into the local jails and see what's happening there and pull that data together.
100% agree. It may be something that we need to course correct on, but I do think that that data is important. On Appendix 3, if you could quickly talk about, you had a 1,700% bump in equipment. I was just very curious, but briefly just talk about what type of equipment have a 1,700% bump. And it may just be that you're adding the new school board, the new school system. I don't know. I don't want to assume.
I don't want to assume either without looking into that, but
I think it's for that. Appendix 3 is one that's automatically generated by the budget system that we have. So these numbers, that should be all of the money associated with Object 11 from the JSEP program.
Okay, and if you can get back, that would be helpful.
yes.
Last thing, only because I try to get in some of the written testimony of some of the people that wrote it on your respective agency. If you could speak about the partnership that you may or may not have with BHA in reference to our young people.
With BHA?
Yeah, the Behavioral Health Administration, the other state agency.
Yes, yes. Well, we have a relationship with BHA, of course, and, we certainly use resources, use their resources to refer kids to services. I'm not sure I understand exactly what you want to.
There was a letter from the Mental Health Association making the connection between DJS and BHA. I'm going to probably tie with you offline, but I guess, and when we do tie offline, I guess I'll ask you the question if you could talk about the behavioral health needs of our young people and how you do collaborate on those types of things. But I'll make sure I set up a separate meeting because I do not want to hold the committee hostage. Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quite a few of my questions were asked by you. Mr. Secretary, I've enjoyed a long relationship with you prior to my legislative days. I was working with Governor O'Malley on leadership development and public safety, and one of the measures that we talked about then was, well, a couple of things. One, retention, or hiring, recruiting, retention. Two, the educational component for our, for our young folks. Now, I've been in the Senate 2 years now, but prior to that, I enjoyed an opportunity to sit on the Juvenile Justice Reform Council. I got kicked off of that when I came over to the Senate. And so I would love if you could update the committee on the efforts on the education component. I know that when we concluded my last session there, the education piece was going to come up later, and so I think that's some valuable information for us. Obviously, we look at the challenges with our juveniles and their stay. So if we could talk also about the average stay of the juveniles and what we've seen. I'm not sure if well, obviously you look at your numbers annually, but if we can see the average stay of our juveniles, trying to actually, sometimes when our juveniles find themselves with Department of Juvenile Services or the other members of the criminal justice system, oftentimes these young people haven't been in school. So your assessment and your ability to assess them when they come into your system, and couple that with the fact that the challenge we talked about before, how long they are in your purview. Lastly, your efforts on recruiting educators, something we talked about as well, and keeping them in. So look forward to that information. If you have some now, that's fine. If not, then definitely look forward to that. That's a huge component for us. And obviously what Senator McCray talked about, that behavioral health piece, which is huge for us.
Absolutely. Thank you, Senator Jackson. And I can, I think, speak to some of that. With respect to the education program, we've made significant progress. I think it was mentioned in the analysis already that we have, constructed the entire Juvenile Services Education Board. The board has created a couple of subcommittees. One was, I guess, an ad hoc subcommittee on recruiting a new superintendent, which they have completed. So we've done those interviews, and we've hired a new superintendent. Her name's Kimberly Pogue. She was formerly a principal in the Noyes School, and she's worked in other facilities within our system. And we are working with Kim. And so, as you might probably already know, The education program is housed within DJS, but it is an independent program within the department. So Ms. Pogue will be operating the education system functionally. The board will supervise in terms of policy, and then the Department of Juvenile Services will provide all the support services. And so we are currently recruiting for, and we did open up some pins so that she can recruit for her, higher level, right and left hand, so to speak. So she can get her leadership team in, and then the transition should be happening in this summer. And we are getting all of the logistics worked out in terms of our IT equipment, transferring the contracts. And so there has been a tremendous amount of work done there. The other main area of focus has been on standards, and that was something that was asked as well in the analysis. And there is a standards subcommittee that is developing education standards. And one of the members that's not a voting member of the group, but is a part of the JSEP board, is the Juvenile Justice Monitor, and they're involved as well in helping us not only develop those standards, but monitor the standards for education. And we are working and embedding staff into our Office of Inspector General Quality Assurance Unit to perform regular audits so that we can bring that information back and assess how we're performing as an agency. In terms of the length of stay, we have seen an increase in length of stay. There have been some slowdowns in court, and I think that's part of the reason why we see that. The other reason that length of stay is increasing is because of that increasing population of youth charged as adults. Their case processing takes significantly longer than in the juvenile court system, and as that becomes a larger proportion of our population, it is a concern that they will back up and start to, start seeing the population numbers increase. And then with respect to hiring, I know our numbers looked a little bit elevated in terms of the vacancy numbers. We did get slowed down at the very beginning of the pandemic because we had to transition from largely everything being an in-person training type of delivery of material to a virtual platform. And some of those aspects, as you would know for sure, that we can't do everything virtually. We can't do CPR virtually. We can't do restraint training virtually. We have to have people together. And so we had to come up with some creative solutions, and essentially what we're doing is trying to cohort small groups when we have to do things in person so that we can limit exposure. It's not, rather than having large teams. And so there have been some, those things slow us down a little bit, but we've continued to recruit, and we have a number of folks that are, about 30 folks since the analysis was done that have start dates, 32 more that are committed already, and 19 that are in interview phase. And so if we back those numbers out, our adjusted vacancy rate drops to about 8.8%, which is pretty close to our historical norm. We're still elevated, but we're working that back now.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary, I want to thank you for your work with me, especially when you looked at shutting down facilities and or downsizing in my neck of the woods, to work to keep those people in a job by transferring them to nearby facilities that have to uproot to leave. So we just ask you, I know what your plans are in the future. There's some of the facilities out there that you've kind of worked to do the same thing, which you told me you would do. I would appreciate it. So would the people who work for your department and live out in that neck of the woods, so they don't have to lose a job and or get transferred far away that they might have to uproot if they want to stay with your group. So I want to thank you for that cooperation.
Thank you so much, Mr. Senator.
And Mr. Chairman, I'm looking at Object 6 again for this department. It's a reduction of 8.2%. The other two smaller ones I did look at were 0. So you might want to ask someone in the department overall, why are these fairly large reductions in Object 6, which is fuel and utilities? Is there something standing out there we're not aware of? Because all utility costs that I'm aware of and fuel seem to be going this way. Just something to consider.
I could,
Some of the Object 6 are costs that are set at a level like by DBM, so they're like controlled sub-objects, and I'm not sure that JS has the ability to control that.
Yeah, that's true, but I'd just be interested, maybe everybody else is, why these larger ones are decreasing when you got the cost going up. Even if DBM does set whatever it is there something hanging out there or something because of COVID? It just seems unusual, let me put it that way.
We'll get to the bottom of it. Secretary Abed, just wanted to say thank you for your leadership, especially on a Friday evening, a Friday afternoon, walking into a Friday evening. But seriously, when you look through the testimony of folks that's even pushing you, they also start by saluting the work that you've done over this period of time in moving our state of Maryland forward. So thank you to not just yourself, but also your team. Ms. Miller, just always exciting and just very versed and diligent in reference to the report, so we also say thank you. Colleagues, we've heard for agencies today. We've done some great work, and this is the opportunity to have a good weekend. So this meeting and hearings of PST is adjourned.
thank you.